Having finished Pride and Prejudice at this point in the course, we're going to take a jump back chronologically to the poet, painter, visionary genius, crazy prophet, William Blake. Um, uh, and I arranged the course this way with this introductory section on Wordsworth and Austen, um, and Little Coleridge, to just put on the table, introduce you to the some basic concerns and techniques of Romanticism. That's to say, the sublime, irony, um, uh, the sublimity of personal freedom, of that personal experience of emotion, um, uh, desire. Um, the To say the sublimity is to say in Blake's terms the infinity, um, the our the irreducibility of our experience um, to determinate limitation, definition. The word definition means limitation, defining. Um, uh, we contain an infinity within us, and this is a premise of Romanticism inherited from the responding to the new democratic forms of society. Um, Romanticism is a form of communication about what it means to be free, um, and um, on so that's sort of a content, a thematic concern of Romanticism. um, Freedom, revolution, self creation. Um, but on a more formal level, as we got into, as we saw in Wordsworth and Austen, um, this amounts to an exploration of the form of irony. Um, so how do we talk about the infinite without being able to define it? Well, it's by reflecting on our own undefinability, reflecting on the inadequacy of what we say, putting that self awareness um, into circulation, into so that's what we get in a Wordsworth poem is a paradox, the difference to me, um, the unknowability of Lucy, the sublimity of grief or compassion for the old man traveling, or Simon Lee. Um, that's what's shared, and that's also the case in Jane Austen's Irony. So these are basic ideas that try to walk around the block with you in these texts, and we're going to be exploring in various ways throughout the course in specific details through the array of iconic romantic writers. So starting off now with William Blake, and then we're going to proceed with a kind of deeper dive into Wordsworth and Coleridge, um, and then the second generation um, uh, romantics, Mary and Percy Shelley, Byron and Keats, um, and then finishing with Austen's last novel, Persuasion. So to review, why does the sublime entail irony? Why did the representation of the sublime entail irony? Um, well, irony is the form of self-reflection, of disruption in representation. So, what seems fixed, like a determinate statement, in order to evoke the infinite within a finite text, artwork, um, it needs to disrupt its own limitation, its own determination or definiteness. Then that's what irony does. So when we look at this iconic romantic image, this is an image that you can really try to consider as a model for any text that we look at in this course. Like, how is it of any text you read is sort of a version of this painting? And so, what's ironic about this? Um, it's it's pretending to show you something. It's a painting. That's the premise of a painting, is to give you something to look at. But what are you looking at? But the act of looking, what you are now yourself doing. So it throws you out of this, looking at this painting. This painting throws you out of, disrupts your sense of having a subject object relationship, and makes you self aware, makes you reflect upon what you are doing right now, in looking at it. So that recursiveness, making me think about what I am doing right now, is the ultimate content of the artwork. So what we thought was an object, a steady object in front of us, becomes a mirror reflecting back to us our own activity, our self-awareness. And this is an image of sublimity or infinity, this circularity. I am the activity of reflecting on what I am. That's a way of representing freedom, and just raising the question of what it means to be self-aware, of what it means to be aware of oneself as a free individual. And this is the idea that that new democratic forms of society are based on the one hand, but also what consumer capitalism is based on the other hand, is a free exercise of desire, pandering to the desire of consumers. Um, so romantic art mobilizes its own emptiness in a way to resist the appeals of consumerism, to resist the trap of determining our own freedom, our own desire, our own imagination, uh, in terms of price, in terms of commodities, um, the way in which our form of economy actually depends on. So art, romantic art, the discourse of aesthetic value, it is a way of intervening a little bit between consumer subjectivity, the economy of consumer desire, and the political ideal of democratic subjectivity, and not just the political ideal, but the also philosophical priority of the individual mind, the human mind. A legacy of the Enlightenment is the priority of reason over the dogmatism of religion. That we have only ultimately the just the judge the authority of our own thought and reflection, to rely on to answer, the ultimate questions of life and death, and the purpose of existence, and so on. So uh, that is, these are the broadest stroke thematic background of Romanticism. So I'm gonna, look now into Blake and how these his early engagement with these ideas. So, just by juxtaposing the two titles, there's no natural religion. There's no such thing as a natural religion. And on the other hand, all religions are one. So no religion is natural, and all of the religions that there are in their artifice are part of the same project. So just these two titles tell us a lot about what Blake's project. So all religions are produced by human history. They're created, fashioned. They're products of human creativity, imagination. They're not simply given by nature. Blake, I just want to come out and say, is an enemy of empiricism. That's one of his prime targets. He's against the premise that there's a reality out there that we just perceive or can represent passively. All experience is creative. That's a really key point. And okay, number two, all religions, like all of human history, are part of a common, single, shared human project. We're always in conversation. Our human creativity is always in conversation with itself, with the rest of the world. So our what's at stake in our when we imagine God, the ultimate, the infinite, it's basically a conversation, a project exploring what it means to be human. This is a human invention. The idea of the infinite, the whole. We're talking to one another through our various ways in which we imagine the infinite, God. We're participating in common conversation about the common question of what it means to be ourselves, what it means to be human. So let's see. Shared project of being human, discovering human truth. No man can think, write, or speak from his heart, but he must intend truth. It's a philosophical point the condition that's really integral, really foundational for romantic philosophy. Um, German idealists like Kant, Immanuel Kant, and Hegel um, uh, develop this new approach to philosophy, which it's based on the sublime, the sublimity of human freedom, the sublimity of the infinity of human freedom. Um, and it questions, it's called critical philosophy, and questions what are the conditions of the possibility of speaking and thinking the way we do. Um, uh, and the, so this is what Blake is doing here, and saying we can't, our communication, the fact that we're trying to speak the same language to one another, um, and even if we're disagreeing with one another, we're trying to convince the other person that they're wrong. But the condition of the possibility, even of disagreement, is that there is some common truth, that there's a standard of truth to which we're both um, um, bound. This premise that we're, even when we're disagreeing totally, that there's a common concern about which we're disagreement. There's this underlying agreement that's a necessary condition of the possibility, precondition of even of radical disagreement. Some notion of truth that's indicates to Blake a shared project, a shared mindedness that we're all human civilization is participating in. So whatever we do, for whatever reason, we cannot help but think that it's for the sake of truth on some level, for the sake not just of some isolated partial truths, but the truth. We can't deny our investment in the overriding truth of things in general. We just cannot. As a practical matter, it's without self-refutation, because even such denial would itself imply some such investment in the truth. So even if I deny I'm invested in the truth, I'm saying it's true that I'm not invested in the truth. So that's why I say that that's responding to this idea of radical or infinite freedom, or the sublimity of the mind of human freedom, is that it's responding to the fact that we, when we talk, our perception of the world, are representing the whole world in terms of our own sense of truth, of what is true. Yeah, so we're dictating. This is about acknowledging that there's no higher standard. There's no God that we're taking our dictation from. We're writing, trying to find our own script for what's going on, trying to articulate. We're not inventing it from free cloth, from whole cloth, deciding randomly what's going on, but our attempts to define, what it is we find in the world, happen on our own terms, And that's our radical freedom, is that we're defining the realm, the parameters of our experience in our own way. Um, so this singular notion of the truth is humanity's signature prophetic creation, or poetic genius in Blake's terms. Less than all cannot satisfy man. Um, we have this human concern to know, to see the whole picture, to communicate the whole picture. And even though we're not, making up the universe, again, from whole cloth on our own terms, um, it is on our terms that we're trying to define it, trying to define it all, trying to comprehend this whole. Um, so, so this brings us to Blake's critique, gripe with empirical science. He doesn't like the piecemeal um, passivity of, just defining, here's one fact, there's another fact, and recording it as if, again, we're passively taking dictation from the world. Instead, Blake really insists, this is a basic premise of Romanticism and the philosophical school of idealism that began with Kant, um, uh, that we're uh, pursuing a mandate of our minds, a requirement of our own minds, um, to represent the world, the whole of the world, in a certain way. So we don't. Our perception is active. It seems like we're just taking in sense data through our eyes and ears and so on. But we're, to use Kant's term, synthesizing the or all these different perceptions, to trying to pull them together in a common picture. And so there's something creative about that. This it reminds me of the motif in Wordsworth of passivity, activity, and passivity that we'll be talking about when we get deeper into him. Or like in Coleridge, the wind blows through me. I passively experience the wind, but then creatively that am inspired by that. This interaction of what I receive in from the world, and what I give back. It's dynamic back and forth. So humanity's pursuit of this ideal, of truth, the whole, means that people perceive more than sense can discover. We are not clinically detached, neutral, and indifferent to the perceptions of the five senses. Despite, what there's a kind of empirical ideology that makes it seem that way. But so big part of Blake's project, and this is important to bear in mind when we get into the sensuous, just gorgeousness of his actual work, that is not just text, but painting, and the interplay of the visual and the textual is so central to Blake. Uh, so although it seems like our senses are just passively taking in this data, it's actually sublimely creative activity that's going on to synthesize this, synthesize our sensuous experience in terms of a world of human world of meaning, of history, of purpose, um, and so on. So, like romanticism in general, like um, Wordsworth, Dancing with the Daffodils, or Coleridge, Animated by the Wind. Um, th- this the romanticism, and generally Blake, particularly here, it wants to open the doors of perception in his famous phrase, make us aware of this often subliminal, that's sublime, subliminal, um, unconscious creative activity. How do we learn about our uh, unconscious, subliminal, creative activity? Um, well, Blake's word for it is experiment. Experiment is the means by which humanity learns, pursues its desire, exercises its poetic genius. Um, that's interesting because experiment, that's how science works too. Um, so this is a way in which Blake, and I think Romanticism generally, is true to a scientific principle, a principle of scientific method, in a way that the dogmatism of empiricism often isn't, or sort of the objectivity, this um, the dogmatism and complacency and maybe arrogance of a technological culture that are like since the revolution has sort of taken over the world, dominated the world, and is um, uh, drunk with its own power. Um, uh, it's easy to forget that science it proceeds by experiment, by self doubt, falsification, perpetual openness to falsification. That's a famous definition of science um, by the philosopher Karl Popper. Um, the a scientific proposition can must be falsifiable. Um, so this perpetual experimental openness to falsification is uh, actually a key inheritance of enlightenment that uh, romanticism ends up deploying critically, to criticize and question the complacency of technological society. Um, uh, and so there's a great developmental psychologist I'd encourage you to look up. I'll probably go into her work later. Um, Alison Gopnik at University of California, Berkeley. And she has a lot to say that's really valuable and the study of romanticism, and illuminates and corroborates a lot of the intuitions that romantic artists had, both about this point that we learn through experiment, um, and how that is forgotten in the kind of dogmatism of a lot of modern culture, and also even education. Um, and this is related to, Gopnik studies the development of childhood development. And one of her arguments has to do, one of her basic arguments has to do with what we, it's known as confirmation bias. You know, once you know something, you tend to have a bias towards just perceiving things that confirm what you know. Um, um, but Alison Gopnik is just, you know, through studying the child development, shows that that's not the way children learn. That's only adults. Once we sort of get trained in certain kinds of knowledge, the sort of mechanical knowledge that we, you know, industrial and technology exploits, these patterns of uh, systemic mechanical patterns, causal knowledge, um, are patterns in the world that we exploit to maximal advantage. And this has a lot to do with, you know, tool use, exploiting the extraction of the, you know, of the earth, different kinds of manipulation and of the resources of the earth, and technological processes, all depend on repetition and repeatable, understandable, repeatable patterns. But that's not how children learn. Children learn, and that's not what children value or are interested in. Children tend to be more interested in what falsifies what they know. They're curious about what they don't understand. So they're, rather than learning or trying to exploit what we already know, in the manner of adults, children tend to, yeah, learn through experiment, and a curiosity about, you know, things that we don't understand, and this openness to surprise and accident, um, and change. This is what it reveals to us, our underlying creativity, the underlying dynamic interplay involved in experience, which is covered up by our focus on the forms of knowledge that we like to exploit for profit, and, you know, dominating the environment. Um, we do so by kind of deadening our experience, by you know, making our experience itself also mechanistic. Um, Wordsworth's famous line, "We murder to dissect." So, in order to dissect the world, animals, or, you know, any piece of the world, disaggregate things into uh, you know, abstract, linear causal relationships. We have to kill it. We have to extract things from the dynamic, animated interplay of the environment, that Coleridge's wind that blows through and animates everything, and turn it into a causal model that's dead insofar as it's mechanically repeatable. Um, so um, the hence Blake's investment in experiment, or seeing experience as a perpetual experiment, openness to surprise, newness, falsification. The another So opening the doors of perception from the dull repetition, and it, revealing what he calls the infinity in a grain of sand, the infinity of every little accident, opens up a new perspective on the whole. So Blake's application of this argument: he who sees the infinite in all things sees God. He who sees ratio, that is fact, his term for fact and reason only, sees himself only. It's sort of a dull mechanical repetition of a form of mind that's just sees fact and reason repeated over and over again. Um, this is that deadening, murdering to dissect. It's something that like plays out in the poem "The Fly." We'll look at soon. So this is Blake's kind of metaphysical outlook, in a nutshell. Like Coleridge, it's a kind of pantheistic, um, seeing God in everything, and ultimately, a human-centered cosmology. Seeing God finally in the act itself of seeing. Now that can sound very outlandish and all coming after Jane Austen, but it's not actually so far afield. If you think about the importance of experiment and surprise in Jane Austen's plots, the unlikely romance of Lizzie and Darcy, the romance of unlikeliness, the romance of these unlikely surprises. That's really, I think, a deep lesson of the form of her plots, is to distinguish between the shallow romanticism, the shallow appeal of Wickham's romanticism. Austen distinguishes Wickham's commodified romanticism, his uniform romanticism, the romanticism of the uniform. It's just commodified, from the deeper disruptions that Elizabeth exposes herself to, the deeper strangeness and fear and trauma, of the experience of Lydia, and also the unlikeliness of the story that she goes through, the unlikeliness of her story, mediated as it is by the story of Lydia and Lady Catherine, and these highly unromantic accidents. The That's, how the progress from the first to second love works in Austen is the first love for Wickham is seamless and kind of falls into a prescribed and predictable pattern. The second love is disrupts that pattern, comes in an unpredictable way, and is as much a product of accident, of the environmental circumstances, as uh, 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 the heroine's expectations for romance. Um, just in a nutshell, this informs Blake's uh, interest in children, the innocence of children, the playfulness of children, the wisdom of children. Is likewise his interest in Satanism, what he calls the infernal method, um, finding revelation in unlikely ways. Um, uh, and this it also another way of thinking about this is in terms of Gnosticism, um, being which is to a view that we are uh, navigating an imperfect world, and so the revelation comes in through unpredictable surprises. Um, this attentiveness to to what seems insignificant. Uh, Always being open to having the tables turned in terms of what seems important and what seems marginal. Um, so, again, the importance of the context, the what's a significant letter and what's mere ornamentation. It's always getting problematized in Blake in really wonderful ways, and that's what's so fun about him. So let's just uh, to start out, with the Thell's motto. So this is a early text of Blake's, the Book of Thel, and it has to do with female protagonist. It has to do with sexual awakening, and so in a way, it's the basic parameters of the plot share a lot with Austen. Um, uh, and begins with this motto: um, does the eagle know what is in the pit, or wilt thou go ask the mole? Can wisdom be put in a silver rod, or love in a golden bowl? So it's about knowledge, it's about definition, it's about containment, representation, representing wisdom, representing love. Um, recalls the beginning of the Aeolian harp, where Coleridge is kind of hoping to contain find meet emblems for apt containers or representations for these ideal values like wisdom and love. Um, Blake here is kind of correlating that with predation, the eagle and the mole. The eagle prey, the mole is the prey of the eagle. Um, and with knowledge, we prey on the eagle or the mole in our um, knowing, um, in our knowledge, um, uh, our knowledge about the eagle and the mole, their environment, their habitat, um, uh, and so how do we answer these questions? What do you think? Um, the first um, seems to suggest, it. I think the theme of environmentalism is the principle of environmentalism is affirmed, emphasized, and affirmed in general in this motto. Um, so you think, oh, the eagle, he's the apex predator. He knows about he dominates everything. But actually, maybe the mole knows more in when it comes to the pit. Um, so again, it's like what we thought was marginal. It doesn't matter. Like the low, but who knows the meager and the low best? Like he's turning the tables. What seems like the uh, um, least significant has its own perspective, its own center of concern. Um, uh, but in that's it gets even more. I think it turns the table again. The in questioning what you know whether these values in general can be contained. Whether knowledge is definitive ever. Uh, he just as he juxtaposes the eagle and the mole, he juxtaposes wisdom and love, the silver rod and the golden bowl. There's obviously a kind of gender sexual dichotomy at play, symbolism in these images, and what I want to suggest is that these dichotomies are pushing us outward into a image of infinite environmental complexity. We try to contain things conceptually in our knowledge, just like in a kind of predatory way, but they always slip beyond us, like the mole's knowledge of the pit, and evoke more complex, more nuanced patterns of interaction. What is, gender difference other than the interaction of the distinguished terms? And that's once you start thinking about it in that way, it really brings his imagery to life. His images always are evocative of infinity, of these recursive patterns in nature. The I think it just, even the letters we see kind of dissolving into these natural patterns, just as he's suggesting knowledge does in Thell's motto. Um, we'll get into this more, but I just want you to, I think fractals are, part of what Blake is intuiting here. Um, and fractals are related to, what I was saying before about um, the form of mind, how we organize our sense perception according to the parameters of our own mind. We're always um, creatively arranging what we see um, in an infinitely active way. And that's what fractals are about. I can't give you any uh, informed, particularly informed explanation, um, other than to uh, notice that the ways in which fractals um, represent, um, indicate how our representations of the objective world are always m- folding beyond themselves, moving beyond themselves into suggesting a higher order of complexity. Um, so that's what fractals mean, like fraction of a dimension. Like we have a two-dimensional picture um, of reality, but once we try to fill it in with as much detail as we can, it's eventually going to start pushing out into a third dimension. And that is true of any representation of reality. That we try to hold it in one set of parameters, and it's always going to push fractally into a higher order of complexity. Um, so you can see this going on here just in this image. If you look at it, it's like the closer we get to try to get more and more precise on representation of an object, the parameters will at a certain point expand into open up a new dimension or scale of representation. A fractal is a never-ending pattern. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. Um, so it's a good representation of it here. The closer you get, these patterns just you never get at a definitive, you never resolve into a definitive object. You're always in this, you always recur to the activity itself of representation. Does that make sense? So this fractals are good of uh, suggest that are effective at suggesting how our representational activity is itself active. That this subject-object relationship is infinitely interactive. Um, and that's, I think, in a nutshell, what I think is suggested in Blake's motto, that Thel's motto. And I think it's a great thing to keep in mind just when you're looking at his images and thinking about his poetics. He's always trying to dissolve what we thought was a stable object, a stable concept, into dynamic oppositions or symmetries, um, and thereby make us reflective of the activity, the creative activity of our own thinking.